Okay, so where am I? Oh, so I'm actually on the apron. Okay. I think I'm to the south of the apron. And this building seems to be modeled after an old hangar that's there. I think it used to be, I don't know what they used it for back in the day, it's not in use anymore. Doesn't look like this, it's not made out of bricks in real life, it doesn't have this color, but the shape is too similar to be a coincidence, I think. This tank doesn't exist in real life. So the main airport, yeah, should be to the right. So Lufthansa doesn't fly in Iași. So this is definitely not realistic. Okay, let's start moving. I'm gonna be using these controls, and man, are they sensitive. So these are nothing like the real life. I'm just gonna do all kind of stupid shit in the simulator, this video. Unsafe stuff that I would definitely not do in real life. So I'm gonna be drifting around the other planes. All right, so let's take a look. So let's slow down. So I think the general size and shape of the apron is correct, but these buildings are not correct. So nothing you see in front of me right now is like real life. These buildings don't exist in the Iasi Airport. There's no parking lot here. The parking lot is on the other side of the buildings. There's buildings sort of where these buildings to my left are in real life, but they're completely different in shape, size, and anything. So that part is definitely not realistic, but the general shape and size of the apron seems to be correct. Yeah, baby. Lamborghinis are for losers. Real men drift in Cessnas. Okay. Taxiway seems realistic. I mean, it is realistic. This is how it's in real life. It's perpendicular to the apron. Seems about the actual width and length, but let's stop here. I want to show you something. So what you see right here to the right and to the left is the old runway, 1.8 kilometers. It had cement, concrete. It's not in use anymore. It's discontinued. So it's in real life, it's definitely not. It seems to be like it's open here. Well, you know, you could go on it and take off from it, or at least use it as a taxi or something. It's not like that in real life. It's completely closed. It's half overtaken by weeds by now, and it's full of cracks and whatever. It hasn't been maintained in 5 years, and it was old and damaged even before that. So let's go to the main runway, the 1432 runway, the only runway in real life, and I'll just take off from the middle of the runway, which is completely wrong. Nothing I'm going to do in this video from a piloting point of view is meant to be taken seriously, or is any kind of this is how you should actually fly. I'm just fooling around from that point of view. I'm treating it as a game. I just want to show you how realistic the Iasi Airport is. But I will check the trim and flaps, and I will get one notch of flaps, and now I will full power straight ahead. Oh, the hypersensitive rudder pedals, the hypersensitive rudder pedals. All right, let's take off, and we are airborne going towards the south. We took off from 14 and we're going towards the south. And you can see the airfield, the grass strip I was telling you about. This is where I did my school, my flying school, my lessons. So position is correct relative to the big airport. Orientation, angle, the size of the runway is correct. This green patch you see here is correct. I think this is the land that belongs to the airfield. Everything around it is agricultural. But the buildings on the right are nothing like the real buildings. The buildings you see in front of me, like all these houses, are nothing like the real houses. The trees are nothing like the real trees. So nothing is like in reality when it comes to the actual building. So what Explain does, from what I've researched, and now I can confirm it by looking at it, it procedurally generates things. It integrates with OpenStreetMaps, and it knows generally what's happening there. So it knows, for example, that this area right here is probably categorized in OpenStreetMaps as an industrial area. So it just draws factory-looking shapes, but they're not the actual buildings you'll see there in real life. And it knows where the roads are, so I think, no, this is a real road, but I don't think it looks exactly like that. It knows where the train railways are, and this is like a real thing, that these many railways next to each other. It's like a big train parking lot for the industrial area, but the actual details are not like that. These buildings are not real, these buildings are not real, the trees are not real. So it knows that there's a hill here, and the hills look correct when it comes to the geometry, shape, size, slopes, position. I think that, to my eye, looks correct. But it knows there's forest, and it draws these lined up trees, but there's nothing like the real trees. And then if we turn to the right, we'll see the city. And it knows probably where we have low density residential, where we have high density residential, where we have industrial, where we have commercial, and it fills it with generic buildings that look like residential or commercial. But if you look at what I see right now, none of these buildings, zero from these buildings are actual buildings from Iași. Nothing from this is from Iași. What it gets right is the hill, the geometry of the land. So the hills, they're in the right position. They seem to be about the right size. The general shape of the city is correct. The layout of the roads is correct. The rivers, the train, railways, and the fact that there's more stuff around here than it was at the edges is correct, because this is a more dense area of the city. But when you look to the actual buildings, none of it is a real building from Iași. You won't find any one of the Iași landmarks in here, and even in style, these buildings look nothing like the buildings from Iași. That's a completely different vibe that you get. So this part, the actual building level part, is not realistic, but the general layout is actually, and the hills and the valleys look to be correct. So I will be flying just above Sărăria now, which is a part of the Copou Hill, and this is not what Sărăria looks like. All right, let's go back this way. So this would be the hill of Țicău. This is not what Țicău looks like, but the general shape and position of Țicău is correct. Lakes, those lakes in front of me, they're real lakes. Obviously that vertical water is, there's an error there, but ignoring that, the fact that you have a lake here on the right, you have a lake right in front of me, you have some lakes here to the left, these are real lakes, and their shape is correct. So this is the Aronano Lake, the Dorobanți Lake. This village right in front of me is correct. This is the Aronano village, is where it should be. The fact that there's trees around it is correct. The village right in front now, that's the Dorobanți village, is correct. The general shape is correct. This road that goes alongside the lake, where you see this red car, let's go buzz it. You see this red and white cars. This is an actual road, but the actual banks of the lake don't look like that, and the actual road itself doesn't necessarily look like that. And these trees, for example, on the left of the road, between the road and the lake, they don't exist. But the general shape of things is correct, but not the actual buildings. If I go back to Aronano, and again I'm flying like an idiot. This is not supposed to show you how to fly. Don't do any of what I'm doing here in real life. I wouldn't do it. This is the village of Aronano, and it's in the right place, and the road structure is correct, but these are generic houses. They're not the houses from Aronano. This is not how the houses look in Aronano. If I'm correct, the airport is gonna be somewhere here to the right. Yep, there it is. So I basically did a 180 to the right. So I took off from the middle of the runway, going in the same direction which I'm facing now, more or less, going to the south. Then I took a right and I looped back, flying above the city. Let's just fly over the airport one more time. So the runway looks good to my eyes. It direction, size, width, even these things in the end for planes to turn, they're real. This antenna right here in the middle or whatever it is, that's not real. The old runway, which you can see to the right, again, position and size and angle compared to the main runway, correct. The taxiway coming perpendicular on the runway, correct. The general size of the apron, correct. The actual buildings, not correct. The actual planes and trucks and whatever, not correct. This building right here, I think it's trying to mimic a real building. This tank doesn't exist. The grass strip in front, general position, size, direction, length, correct. The green patch around it representing the actual property of the airfield, correct. The buildings, not correct. The fact that there's buildings there and not buildings to the left is correct. So generally, the areas where you see buildings, they're correct. Those are the areas where we have buildings in real life. But the actual buildings themselves, there's nothing like what you see here. Not one of them. Not one of them. Not one of them. So you see this road just coming up on the left, now middle of the screen. This road, this lake is correct, position is correct, size is correct, location is correct, shape is correct. And this road going alongside it is absolutely correct. Well, it's not detailed, but it's correct when it comes to shape and where it goes. I run on this road. I know this road. But this is a dirt road in real life, a gravel road. It's not a paved road. Here, they draw it as a paved road. And I think you get the idea by now. This village right here, it's here, but these are not the houses from that village. So coming back to my original question, I want to use Explain 11 for dead reckoning navigation. I want to, for example, set up a flight from Yash to Brasov. So I'll prep the flight, I'll do the flight plan, I know the distance, I know the heading, I know the speed of the aircraft, I know where I should be, when I should be. So along the way I should be able to visually recognize landmarks. Like I'll be flying above Baku, I don't know, 40 minutes into the flight, just taking an example. And will I be able to recognize Baku, given that Baku, like Yash, will be procedurally generated? And I think the answer is yes. For a big city, for a big landmark, I'll be able to recognize it. I'll be able to practice navigation because I'll be flying over an area that looks like the Baku area, which is like plain, flat plains, and suddenly there's going to be a big city there, having about the right shape and being about oriented in the right way. And yeah, the buildings won't be the actual buildings from Baku, but I'll know that's Baku because there's nothing else remotely close to that size or shape in that area. Then if there's like a huge lake somewhere, I'll see that huge lake, and if there's like a big mountain, I'll see that mountain. So I think it's good enough from that point of view. But let's idle it and let's land like a boss. Again, like you should never ever even think about doing in real life. But if I want to practice going to a backcountry grass strip in the middle of nowhere, and that grass strip is just beyond a certain village, and there's a particularly distinctive yellow house in the southern tip of that village, and that's a very clear landmark in real life. I won't find that house in X-Plane 11. This is like a fucked up landing. I won't find that house in X-Plane 11. I wasn't paying attention because it's all procedurally generated, and it might not even have that village, but even if it has, it's gonna generate some Bavarian-looking brick and red roof houses, which are nothing like the real life houses. So at that level of detail, like, you know, coming from above the Buchum Hills, like in front of me, and maybe it's a bit foggy and I recognize a particular thing, a particular house, a particular pond. I don't think I can use it for that level of detail. I think there's a plane on the other end of the runway, so let's just go crash into it. But generally speaking, for the bigger landmarks, like flying from Iași to Cluj, and here's Piatra Neamț, and here are the mountains, and here's Târgu Mureș, I think it's definitely good enough for that. Don't take off, or take off, but I'll keep it down. I think it's definitely good enough for that. So I think I can use it, but I am really looking forward to the Microsoft simulator they want to get out this year, because they're bragging with a whole new level of detail. And you know what? The examples they've been showing, like, you know, the big, huge, famous airports, what? What was that? Nothing happened. And there were two planes there. Apparently cannot crash into another plane. So the Microsoft Flight Simulator that's going to come out this year, the videos I've seen of it look amazing, but the videos of famous locations, even X-Plane 11, if you want to fly in New York and you get the scenery packs and you customize it, you can make New York like almost like real life, because for those kind of locations, there's a whole bunch of people that have spent a lot of time to model it very close to how it looks in real life. What are you guys doing there? For a place like Iași, you won't find that. So you have this, and this is great, and thank you, Vali, for doing it. But I don't think there's anyone in the Microsoft Flight Simulator team spending time manually rendering stuff from the Iasi Airport. Yeah, I told you I like drifting. Drift, drift, drift! Drift! So I don't know. Can Microsoft pull enough information from its satellite imagery, Bing, Maps, whatever, to generate this kind of stuff realistically without anyone manually doing it? Can they generate the actual buildings from Iași realistically, so I can fly above the Palace of Culture and recognize the landmarks that everybody from Iași knows in their sleep? Will I be able to fly to a backcountry grass strip in the middle of nowhere and recognize that yellow house that I've seen in real life? That's like a great landmark in that tiny village just before the land strip. I don't know. If they manage to do that, that would be amazing, but I'm really curious if they can. So that's it for now. Maybe I'll do more Explain 11 videos, maybe I won't. I have no idea. For now I'm just having fun and really looking forward to the day when I can actually fly again. Bye bye. Alright, so before I get into X-Plane, I want to talk a little bit about how I have it configured. I am by no means an X-Plane expert, but the little that I know I will share, so you know what kind of configuration I have. So one thing I know about X-Plane, even though I don't know the details of how it all works, but I know that it is a very customizable game. So there's a million people out there doing add-ons and plugins. You can take something like an airport, for example, and come up with a scenery pack that makes it look much better or more realistic than in the default version of the game. You can add new planes to the game. You can add a whole bunch of stuff. So these add-ons, you can find them on forums. You can find them on shops. Some are free, some are paid. I have nothing of that installed on my game. So I have the default X-Plane 11 as I bought it and downloaded a month or so ago. And in the default version of the game, the Iasi Airport, the main Iasi Airport, the commercial airport, which is this airport, Lima Romeo India Alpha, is, as far as I can see, has been updated twice. So we have an initial version from 2015, which is before the new runway. And we have a new version from 2017 from Valley, a contributor apparently, which is after the new runway. So I think this is what we currently have in the game, this 2017 scenery pack from Valley. So thank you, Valley, for that. Valley apparently did a whole bunch of other stuff for Baku, Brasov, Cluj. And also, here it is, the grass strip in Iași, which is the airfield, the grass strip airfield, which is very close to the big airport, about a kilometer south, more or less, where I actually did my training and my flight school and got my ultralight license. I did it on this grass strip. So I never flown in real life from the big airport, from the, where is it? From the Lima Romeo India Alpha. I've never flown as a pilot from this airport. I've flown as a Paris passenger 100 times. I've flown above it in my little plane. So I've seen it from above. I've seen it as a passenger. So I know it very well, how it should look like. But I never landed or took off from there as a pilot. But I did that hundreds of times from this grass strip, which apparently is all added by Valley. It didn't even exist before Valley added. So again, thank you again, Valley. So this is what I have in the game as far as I can understand when it comes to the Iasi Airport. I googled a little bit and I found a few other versions. Now this is an older version from 2013, so it's way before the new runway. So it's probably, I mean, it's definitely not going to be up to date. And I also found a newer version from this year, actually, from 2020, from April, updated May 30th, which is like, what, 2 months ago, which I was excited about it. By looking at it, I see it's not a realistic version. And what I mean by that, it's a creative interpretation. This is not how the Iasi Airport looks, not at all. We don't have jetways. These buildings are not the real buildings. I don't know what these fences are. They don't exist in real life. That building on that side of the runway doesn't exist. There's no trees here. This big windmill, it's not there. So Daniel, this guy did something, and I'm sure it looks good, and I'm sure he knew what he was doing. But it's not a realistic interpretation of how it looks. So I haven't downloaded it, I haven't installed it because I'm looking for realism. So the reason I'm looking for realism is because the way I want to use the X-Plane 11 sim is for dead reckoning navigation. From what I've seen, I cannot usefully use it for actual training, as in stick and rudder. Getting familiar with the controls of a plane or feeling the plane is nothing like real life. So every control in this sim is, or the controls I have at least, they're way too sensitive and way too light, and there's no weight to them. It's nothing like actually flying a real plane. Again, with the setup I have, I'm not speaking for anyone else. So that's not something I feel I can learn a lot from. But what I feel I can use X-Plane 11 for, in a way that I can also benefit in real life flying, is navigation, and particularly dead reckoning navigation, which is visual navigation. So I take off from Iași and I go to Suceava one day, and I know my heading, and I know the distance, and I know my speed, and I know how much the flight should take, and I have milestones along the way. So I know, for example, that 20 minutes into the flight I should be seeing the city of Târgu Frumos on my left, or whatever. And you look for it 20 minutes in, and if you don't see it, then you know you're probably lost and you need to make some decisions. But in order to do that kind of navigation, which I don't have a lot of experience in real life, the game needs to be realistic enough. It doesn't have to be like completely realistic, but it has to be realistic enough. So I need to be able to recognize landmarks, lakes, mountains, cities, whatever, along the way. And that's what I want to show you today, how Yash looks like in this game. Is it realistic or is it not realistic? Graphical settings that matter the most is this one, the number of world objects. So this is actually the number of buildings, trees, lakes, roads that will be rendered. If you lower this, it's going to look like the moon. It's going to look like you're flying on Mars. It's going to be barely anything, just a few buildings in the very, very centers of the cities, and that's about it. You need to have this on maximum if you're looking for realism, because this will generate the maximum amount of objects that the game is capable of generating. This is going to tax your computer to a degree, but you can decrease reflection to 0, you can decrease anti-aliasing to 0, or just the first setting as I have it. These two settings, they make the game look prettier, but they're not actually adding realism in the strict sense of the word. So if you're just interested in realism, not necessarily how the game looks, and your computer is not powerful enough, you can take this to 0 and you're not going to miss anything. I leave these two on maximum and I can handle it, and I get about 30 FPS. And what do I have? I have an RX 580, 8 gigabytes for the GPU. I have a Ryzen 5 2600 for the CPU. I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, 266 speed, and I have an SSD drive on which I've installed this game. So this is my setup, and with these settings, I get 30 frames per second, which is good enough for me. So let's start a flight. I'll take the Cessna 172, and I'll start from the big airport, from the commercial airport, which is code is Lima Romeo India Alpha on the runway. That looks great. So let's just start.